Hi there, and welcome back to the Energy Sector Heroes podcast. My name is Michelle Fraser, and every week I will speak with incredible people who share their lessons, experiences, and stories from their time spent in the energy sector. Hi there, and welcome back to this week's episode. If you're new to the show, then please take a second to subscribe and even consider sharing the show with just one other person. This week I am joined by Segun Faniran. Segun is the founder and publisher of Construct Africa. Segun, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for having me on. My name, as you said, is Segun Faniran. So I'm a civil engineer by training. I qualified as a civil engineer about 40 years ago, slightly over 40 years ago, quite a while back. And after my training as a civil engineer, I first started working with a water supply utility back in Nigeria, where I was designing water supply infrastructure, pipelines, water treatment plants, different things to do with water supply anyway to the town. I also managed the operations for a water supply utility. And then after a while, I decided to follow my dreams, which was really to pursue opportunities in the construction sector. And I left Nigeria, where I'm originally from. And I went to do, first of all, a master's in construction management. That was at Herod University in Scotland. And from there, I ended up doing a doctorate degree as well in construction, and that was in Australia. I ended up in academics initially, and after a while, I stepped aside from academics into consulting. First of all, with a small firm where we were doing sort of project planning, project controls around Australia. I then ended up with a much larger firm and ended up here in the Middle East, and then found myself moving from construction planning and control into construction disputes. And I subsequently became a director at Hill International, and then ended up in Toronto Townsend, where I still am, although I'm at the tail end of my career. And I focus a lot nowadays as well on Construct Africa. I founded Construct Africa to focus on thought leadership, market intelligence in the African construction infrastructure sectors. So that's a bit of a long-winded intro to myself.
So I was going to ask you, how did you get started off in the energy sector?
Construction sector?
In the energy sector. How did you get started off there? What made you decide to go into practice civil engineering after being in academia?
Well, when I was in academia, I was doing quite a number of consulting jobs as well. And I think at one point I just felt that I just wanted to get a bit more grounded, so to speak, with some of the practicalities of construction as opposed to the theory. And I ended up doing more and more consulting work, and then ended up sort of coming over here, and everything exploded because this place, as you know, in the Middle East, Dubai, where I am, was one huge construction site. It's still huge, but back then it was construction everywhere. So that's how I sort of stepped aside into construction. But in terms of why I did civil engineering in the first place, many, many years back in Nigeria, Lagos as well, Lagos, Nigeria, that you might have heard of, was a huge construction site. And I went to high school in Lagos, Ibubi College. And I remember that everywhere was just flyovers and highways and all sorts of things being built all over. And that sort of, caught my attention. And I said, well, I want to be involved in this. I was also good in mathematics in high school. And I think back then the conventional wisdom was, if you're good in mathematics, you'll make a good engineer. So that's how I ended up in civil engineering.
Okay, so you've studied in quite a different international areas. Do you think it's been beneficial for you to do that?
When you say international areas, are you talking about geographies, or you're talking about the different
countries? Yes.
Yeah, it has been. Obviously, it broadens one's sort of mindset. That's how I will put it. It broadens your mindset when you're exposed to practices in different parts of the world. It just makes you, I think, better able to think outside the box because you are quite aware that, things are done different in different places and you sort of develop an understanding of the different sort of circumstances, different contexts, different things that, that go into the practice of engineering and construction.
Okay, so what made you decide to go into engineering?
Well, I think that's what I said in the first place a couple of minutes ago. But yeah, I tried to do civil engineering, as I said, because back then, as I said, Lagos was a huge construction site. And that's when I was in high school. And that's sort of piqued my interest, so to speak. Seeing all the flyovers, all the roads, everything being built all over the place. And I think I did a few sort of work internships and that sort of thing. But as I said, I was also good, very good in mathematics, or at least I like to think so back then. And yeah, back then when I was younger in high school, we kind of felt that if you're a good mathematician, you will make a good engineer. That's what we were kind of advised, so to speak. So yeah, the combination of my mathematical sort of aptitude, coupled with all the civil engineering projects that were sort of ongoing around at that time, yeah, that's what attracted me to engineering.
Yeah, so you've been quite successful in your career. Where do you see your next step going?
Well, right now, as I said, I'm kind of at the tail end of my consulting career, and I founded Construct Africa a couple of years back. And Construct Africa is, a provider of market intelligence and thought leadership about the Africa construction and infrastructure sectors. My goal as I go forward is really to give back. I'm sort of going past where I'm sort of hustling for, accolades or money or whatever it is that people sort of look for in the workplace. But I'm looking more, at giving back, mentoring the upcoming generation, supporting advocacy about some pertinent issues that I see affecting the construction sectors and sort of using Construct Africa as a platform, as a channel to do that, focusing primarily on the construction and infrastructure sectors across Africa. So in terms of where I see myself going in more of establishing Construct Africa from both from as a viable commercial entity, but also in terms of providing relevance in terms of thought leadership and helping up and coming generation, to develop their skills and talents.
What do you think is the best way for the up and coming generation to develop their skills and talents?
Well, there's a lot of things. I mean, when I look back at my career, quite a number of things. First of all, you never stop learning. I think that's one of the first things that people need to recognize and realize. I think sometimes as engineers in particular, and I'm talking about engineers, people in the technical sort of fields, they kind of feel that sometimes at the early stage anyway, that, based on what they've learned in sort of university, that they think that they kind of know it all. But you find out that when you graduate from university, things are much different from in real life from what the theory, that you actually learned in school. So continuous learning is number one. Number two is having a good mentor. I think it always helps to have a good mentor. And mentorship takes different forms. You can have formal mentors, formal in the sense that you have a sort of a formal mentoring relationship. But there's also informal mentorship where you just sort of seek out people who are experienced in your field, people who are experienced in your industry. You seek them out for their experience, sound them out for advice, and they're all over the place, either within your workplace, more senior professionals, also by engaging in professional organizations, professional associations, your Society of Engineers, your, I don't know, Institute of Construction Professionals or whatever it is, in your country or wherever you are. And through that, sort of get knowing some of the more senior professionals, and engaging with them and sort of seeking advice from them. Yeah.
Okay. Is it important to have a mentor throughout your career?
It helps having mentors throughout your career. I didn't necessarily have mentors throughout my career, but at certain points, there were different sort of inflection points in my career where I did get, support and guidance, senior members of the profession. So it helps to have mentors along the way. But I think what's more important is to have the mindset of seeking out that sort of mentorship advice, So not necessarily having that one mentor, which helps, but seeking out advice, seeking out guidance, seeking out the opinions, observations, whatever, of senior members of the profession. Yeah.
Okay, so what advice would you give to the young professionals that were coming into the civil engineering construction space?
Well, as I said earlier, first of all, have an open mindset, being the frame of mind to continuously learn. It's really important, I think, continuously learning because things keep on changing. Just typical example of that is recently with AI, for example, you just have to keep on learning. You find out that what you learn in the university either doesn't apply directly, the way it appears as if it's going to apply directly. So you have to just keep on learning and keep on being adaptable, to circumstances. The economy changes, different things change. Another advice I will give young engineers in particular, in terms of career growth within organizations, is that it's not just enough to be the best skill technically. I keep on coming across several young engineers who say, "Oh, I'm really good at this. I'm really good at that, or something. Or I had a first class, or whatever they say. Or I've been working for 10 years, or whatever it is, and maybe you're either not getting promoted or you're not promoted to where you think you should be. But when you're within an organization, you should also try to add value to the organization. It's really important. You can be the best engineer, but if you don't add value, and value is in different ways within different organizations, you could be putting your hand up to support certain initiatives within the organization. Sometimes some organizations, they do things like launch and learn. Sorry, learn and launch, whatever. Anyway, where during the lunch break, certain people sort of stand up to discuss certain projects they've worked on, right? And sort of give case studies. Always try to put your hand up for those sort of initiatives or even suggest initiatives within the organization that you think would benefit the organization in terms of, their relationship with clients, for example, or even improving the working environment, all those sort of things. Other things that I think that can help up and coming engineers are, well, having good communication skills is always very important. And when I say good communication skills, it's not just about being able to speak well or whatever, but it's about communicating your ideas. I find that engineers are in particular guilty of that. They like speaking acronyms, technical terms and stuff. Sometimes, you have to be able to communicate to non-technical people such that they understand what you're saying. So good communication skills, learning, adding value to your organization, being a good team player. A lot of engineering work is done in teams. You have to relate to other members of the team as well, Well, not just relate, you have to be able to work together with them and collaborate with them to deliver a project. So those are some of the things that I think young engineers should try to develop, to advance their careers.
So that is really interesting advice because I know that a lot of the young professionals maybe not that confident to go and approach their managers to put in suggestions to help improve the company because they're maybe only just out of university. What advice would you give to them to overcome that?
Yeah, it's sometimes not so much about giving advice. Well, first of all, advice to overcome that. If they genuinely feel that they have something to contribute or to suggest, yeah, managers are always welcome. Sorry, they're always, they're generally welcoming. I know that there could be exceptions. Yeah, I do realize that. But just, summoning up the courage to say, well, I observed this thing, or I have this idea that I want to propose, I want to suggest, and proposing it to the manager. I guess they should always realize that it won't always be accepted. So they have to have that in their mind as well, and not take it personally. When their suggestions or their proposals are not sort of taken up.
As the technology evolves, do you think that AI will have a big impact on how engineering will be carried out in the future?
I certainly think it will. I think one of the advantages of AI, my opinion anyway, is in terms of improving productivity. A lot of things that research work, supporting you with research work, for example, digging out old information that you would, could take ages to dig out. A lot of engineering sometimes is about, looking for, factors, looking for previous data, looking for data that you're going to use to do a design or whatever it is. So AI helps in that aspect, developing LLMs, and using those LLMs to generate, to do research, to come up with ideas, to brainstorm, all those sort of things. So I think AI definitely will. The human factor will always be there though, because you have to interface and ensure that whatever AI is producing is actually correct, or rather is actually attuned to the context in which you want to apply it for. So I think AI is going to be very useful from an engineering perspective, particularly in improving the productivity of the engineering process, of engineering designs, report writing, all those sort of things. AI will definitely come in handy there.
Okay. Because it is going to change how we engineer quite a lot. Do you think it'll be in a good way or in a bad way, or do you think progression is always good?
I think it's going to be in a good way. I see a lot of positive elements to it. Having said that, everything has the element of if they're abused, they're, obviously it can be used for bad things as well, for negative things as well. But I think it's going to change for good. As I said earlier, and particularly in terms of the productivity of, the engineering design, and process, yeah.
Okay, I was going to ask you, what is one of your proudest achievements in your career?
Oh, wow. Okay. That's an interesting one. I don't know. I've worked on several projects, been involved in several things. I think one of the things that I feel proud of most is, I like developing young engineers or talent. In fact, one of my goals every year, is to, within my team, to always sort of bring out the best. I always like to say that, my goal is always to help people to achieve their potentials, whatever those potentials would be. Because I feel like everybody's different. We can all be in the same team doing this same design, doing this on the same project, but everybody has their different strengths. And I like helping people to realize what their strengths are and to achieve their maximum potential. So my greatest achievements, and I'll put an S there, is when I realized that, a particular person that I've been working with or that's been on my team then comes back to me and say that, oh, wow, after working on your team, I now feel, confident in myself as an engineer or whatever it was. And seeing that transformation, those are what I consider to be my greatest achievements. Yeah.
Okay. And that is an amazing achievement as well. But how do you manage your team, especially the young professionals, to get the best out of your team?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I give them that latitude to take initiatives and fail. I know that sounds, you see, because, when they feel safe, right, that they're not going to be overly criticized, so that's the first thing. I provide a safe space, to work with. That's number one. Number two, I always approach most projects, or most new talent, by understanding where their weaknesses are. And those weaknesses, I try to backstop those weaknesses, for want of a better word, by giving them my experience. So, for example, if I'm working on a new project, I prepare a template or something as to how I see that, project working. And that will probably be their starting point, to sort of work on that. By the time you do that about twice or thrice, they then sometimes they just wake up and say, "Hey, hang on a second. This thing is not that bad." You know what I mean? And they develop the confidence in actually doing it by themselves, So it's really, I think the first thing is the safe space, really, because is when people get scared of failing obviously I'm not encouraging anyone to fail, but giving them that safe space to experiment, to think outside the box, not to think that, whatever they say is trivial or whatever they say is, I mean, even if I don't accept what they say, which a lot of times I don't, but I don't sort of put it across in a way as if let them know that it's me that doesn't accept it. It doesn't mean in another situation that you might not be right. So that safe space, giving them the confidence to do what they want to do, and always being, a reach back for them to come back and inquire about when they want clarity on certain things. Yeah.
Okay, because it is hard to maybe fail no matter how old you are and how senior you are or junior you are. What advice would you give to a young professional if they haven't had a favourable outcome with something that they implemented? Because it will be much harder. They'll take it. I think a young professional will take it harder. Everybody takes it hard, but failing. But what advice would you give to them?
I mean, the first advice I will give is to go back, sit back, think through what happened, see where things perhaps didn't work out right, and use it more as a learning experience, rather than feeling sort of knocked back that, this didn't happen. I see everything as a learning experience. And if you look at it from that perspective, it doesn't make that whatever happened positive, but what it does is that you sit back and whatever happened that didn't go right, you learn from that and you try to, address that in, going forward in the future. So that's part of the continuous learning that I was referring to earlier on.
Yeah, yeah. Because I know when I left university, I thought that I would not have to study anymore, but I think you have to always continuously learn because what you learn at university is good. And I'm not going to say it's not good, but it is good and valuable. But I think how you apply it is very much different.
Yeah, that's right. How you apply it, taking civil engineering, for example, let's say, you're designing a structure, right?
Mhm.
When you're designing a structure in the university, we are taught all sorts of things about bending moments, for example, I don't know, compressive strength and all those sort of things to do with beams and stuff like that, and columns and all that sort of thing. But when you get into real life, you start thinking about different other things. The economy of the structure, for example, how much is going to be spent. You can design to a point where the client perhaps might not even be able to build what you designed, for example. So you think of all sorts of things like, economy, which is very important. That economics part of it is not always taught in school, for example. But you also think of things like, interacting with other professionals, with the architect, for example, to have an idea of, what the architect is looking for, in terms of the spatial, design of that particular structure, all those sort of things. So, yeah, so just continuously learning, interacting with other professionals to see how those other professions impact on the work that you are doing. And what other factors, economic factors, for example, availability of materials. Your design might be based on a particular kind of cement or whatever it is. That's some sort of standard ones that you learned in university. And then you get out and you find out that it's a different kind of cement with different strength, and obviously you have to adapt to that. So it's just a continuously thinking outside the box and adapting your thinking to, the current situations. Yeah.
Okay, that was really good advice because it's really interesting what you said was that you can't design alone because your design can impact on a lot of different disciplines. I was going to ask you, and I know the answer to this, but do you really think that that's true for the young professionals that you have to integrate with all the different disciplines with your design?
Yeah, you have to. I mean, as a young professional, typically what happens is you are assigned tasks anyway. So you assign a task to do a specific thing, and you can quite often end up working in a silo, focused on that task. But the point is, as you are doing that task, the information required for you to do that engineering task, quite often you have to seek that information, which might mean picking up the phone or, going to ask other professionals involved in that about what sort of other appropriate parameters you should consider for that task. And by the way, as a young professional, one of the things that helped me a lot, as a young professional. Well, I really wasn't very young then, but I was sort of my mid-career, was when I would go to ask certain information, from my boss and say, well, I want to do this, but could he sort of give me the guidelines? And I was always told, ask, right? Always ask. Just keep on asking. Don't think that anything is too trivial to ask. Obviously, I had a good boss who gave me a safe space, but always ask and ask and ask. I never think that anything is too trivial to ask. So I think we are cultivating that attitude of asking and seeking information always helps.
I was going to ask you on that very important advice that you gave. Do you think there is ever a wrong question to ask? Do you think all questions are valuable?
I think all questions are valuable. I really wouldn't say that there's a wrong question to ask, because the fact that you want to ask it means you want clarification on that question, so I don't think there's a wrong question to ask. Now, I do understand that sometimes when some people ask questions, their bosses or managers might belittle them and say, how come you're asking me this sort of, I don't know, silly question or whatever it is. But even then, I think it's still good to ask. If they do say that, then you just go and find the answer from somewhere else, or you go back to the drawing board and rethink it again or something like that. But I can't think of a wrong question per se to ask here. I ask questions all the time. I still ask questions even now, even from my junior engineers. I ask them questions here.
Because that is really important. What you mentioned, no matter what stage of your career you're at, you still have to ask questions.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I don't think there's I ask questions, I ask their opinions about things. I quite often begin the day actually, by speaking with team members and saying, okay, this is what I'm thinking of, what do you think of this, for example? And the person then tells me what they think about it. And that gives me the perspective to consider, which I might accept or not accept. So, I think asking questions, particularly in my field, asking questions is really very important to understand the different sort of, perspectives, different angles to consider a particular situation.
I think so too. So I'm maybe going to end things there on that very amazing conversation that we've just had. So that's all the questions I have today. I would like to thank Segun for your time. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening and see you next week. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, I'd like to gently encourage you to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts and share the show with another person. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or via my website, www.michellefraserconsultancy.com. Thanks again for listening and see you next week.